So the first thing on the list of things that I've watched is The World God Only Knows. You know, whatever last week. No surprise there, I think. And that was a pretty entertaining watch. It's kind of hard to place my figure on everything why, but I think a large part of it is I was just highly amused by what the series was doing, which kind of made it very meta, where the basic idea is, since it's about a guy who's trying to use his knowledge of um, gal game dating sim mastery to woo girls in real life that he wouldn't otherwise care about because of their their usually contrived setup. Basically, you know, it kind of makes the series very meta, where it kind of intentionally tells you what it is doing in order to do it, because while the knowledge may not apply in real life, the truth of the matter is this knowledge isn't being applied in real life, it's being applied in the real life of an anime, which is basically the same sorts of contrived relationship ideas. And so it's kind of amusing in that way, in my opinion, where it's playing against itself in the idea that I don't know. Again, it's kind of amusing thinking of that, and the way it was executed was actually pretty good. I enjoyed the main character. I think, sort of like Akikon, I kind of don't see why he wouldn't be a more capable character, since, again, it's usually confidence that people are really into, and he's pretty confident, and I guess less like the Akikon guy. He doesn't seem confident to a fault. Maybe just more trickier to approach, I suppose. But oh well. That aside, I thought he was a really entertaining character to watch too, and I didn't even realize that the second season is rated even higher. So I'm looking forward to whenever that finally comes out, which I don't know how long it'll be. But it could be a long time. But I'll make do with whatever. Let's see. After that, I watched One Piece Movie 8, and a lot of what motivated that was conversations where people had wondered, whether or not they could watch it, and me being kind of curious. I was maybe thinking of putting it off until my friend that I'm rewatching One Piece with, until he finished season 2, which this movie is more or less a recap of. It's mostly a recap of the main story, which most of season 2 spends building up to, and in that regard, using that to remember why I enjoyed season 2 is actually not too bad. The problem is that it is definitely not a good way to get introduced into One Piece, into what made the season good in particular, and spoiling a lot of that in advance may not be a good way to encourage somebody to watch it, because they could get they could give up in the middle of the second season because they already know what's going to happen or something like that. Even though the way it's executed in the actual anime is far superior, and that's just the natural way of things. It's because One Piece is actually a pretty enjoyable thing to watch. Well, I guess, to be fair, I'm enjoying watching One Piece a whole lot, and for me, watching One Piece is a lot like, it's got good build-up, good payoff in the end. It doesn't really feel like it's fucking around with you a whole lot when you're watching it, which is pretty noteworthy, because sometimes any really long-running shonen show kind of feels like that. I mean, with Dragon Ball Z, this planet will explode in 5 minutes, and then 2 weeks later, you're still waiting for the planet to explode. That's bullshit. And it doesn't feel like One Piece does that kind of thing. I mean, it had a moment there, I remember in season 2, where it almost felt like that. But it also felt like it was building certain things up that were really important things. So, not nearly as bad, but it almost fell into doing the same sort of thing. And I'm remembering that now, talking about remembering season 2 stuff. But overall, One Piece movie 8, again, not a bad thing if you're wanting to kind of remember the second season. Just, or rather, the things about the main story that made it very entertaining, but probably not a good way to introduce it, because even watching it, I'm like, that's an important fact that they really should have even at least mentioned in there, and I'm surprised they didn't. And there's another important one, blah blah. And without those things, you kind of lose your context and relevance of the events that happened. And when you think about that, it's really easy to go back and appreciate what happened in One Piece. I mean, you could maybe argue that the pacing could have been faster, but at the same time, it covered so much more important things. And I guess I'm talking a little bit too much about One Piece, but to be fair, I also watched One Piece with my friend that I've been watching Naruto and One Piece with. And Naruto Shippuden Set 9 is something that we also watched. When did we watch it? I think we started watching it Friday night and finished on Saturday. And the reason these thoughts are up here now is because after that we went back to One Piece, and the contrast is just so obvious watching them side by side for us, where for both of us it's like things are happening in Naruto and they're kind of interesting things, but at the same time it feels like watching Naruto like this, we feel like at some point they changed anything that they completely turned around and started changing things that we had been invested in and thought were interesting about Naruto, and at the same time, while in theory it's making progress towards an ultimate thing, in practice it doesn't feel like it's building anything up. So that's left us with feeling like Naruto Shippuden is kind of messing around with us. Now, to be fair, there is a it's not that it was a completely bad DVD. It was actually a good conclusion to what they had started before. It's just, I can't help but watch it and think that we got introduced to some characters that we're never ever going to see again. And that it was almost as important as the events were, they were ultimately not too much of an impact, I guess. And I guess a lot of that comes from feeling like these events started in set 8, maybe on the second or the third disc, and all of set 9 covered events that happened in there. So I don't know, maybe beginning to feel disillusioned by Naruto Shippuden, but not nearly enough to stop. And the truth of the matter is that regardless of how my friend feels, even if we started focusing on One Piece solely, the truth of the matter is we'd catch up to the end of the Funimation release, and that'd be that. And then we start picking at the Naruto leftovers. That's if we don't watch Naruto as it comes out like we always have. So, I don't know. Kind of opinion. I've actually got an opinion on some of this stuff tonight. And I am trying to be careful to discern my opinion from discernible fact. Because the truth of the matter is there could be aspects of Naruto that are actually really, really, really exciting compared to One Piece, but since it's not what I kind of look for in characters and the stories and the animation or whatever, maybe I just wouldn't notice it as well. And I think I've heard some people out there that like other anime who don't put One Piece up on the top of the long-running shonen series. And I just don't personally feel it myself, but that's just an opinion, right? Anyways, that's all a lot of talk about a bunch of different stuff. The other thing is I watched the first 3 DVDs of Sherlock Hound, and so the first thing I learned is I knew that Miyazaki had done directing in it, and I thought he had directed the whole thing, but looking at it, on Wikipedia in particular for more information, I found out that he only directed 6 episodes, and then I think a licensing issue came up with the copyright holder for Sherlock, I guess, and once that was resolved, it was 1985, I think, and then Miyazaki had already moved on to other things, so other episodes were directed by another person who may have actually done a lot of work on Lupin the Third, which may explain why a whole lot of it just feels familiar. And the thing about Sherlock Hound that's interesting is I wouldn't necessarily say the stories are particularly spectacularly noteworthy or anything like that. I mean, Sherlock himself is a pretty decent character. Watson is a pretty decent character. Mrs. Hudson is a pretty decent character, and my only real complaint would just be that Moriarty is who kind of sets the tone of the series. He seems more like a Saturday morning cartoon villain than some sort of evil genius. So Saturday morning evil genius or something like that. And again, that's not necessarily bad. It just, I mean, I'm not terribly familiar with Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty stuff, but it just kind of felt maybe anticlimactic, a little weaker than I expected. And that's probably maybe not too much of a surprise. I mean, how many times have I gone into something with unreasonable expectations and then just not walked out the other side with as high an opinion as maybe I could have had if I had gone in completely blind, right? But anyways, the interesting thing watching it is that it's actually just to kind of realize that I'm watching a series. The animation for the series actually seems pretty good. As in, you can really feel, especially the episodes that Miyazaki directed, the character designs and animation for those, you can kind of feel, this feels like watching a Studio Ghibli Miyazaki movie. Either or. Apparently there's a ton of overlap between them because, Studio Ghibli would be familiar with Miyazaki's work and would have character designs and animation styles similar, and that's why a lot of the Ghibli stuff that isn't directed by Miyazaki has a lot of the same feeling. But at the same time, apparently Miyazaki is so thorough with his storyboards, from what I've heard from a friend. And I guess it occurs to me that the special edition, the disc 2s, the extra discs of many of the Miyazaki directed movies, actually have a storyboard walkthrough of this show, which pretty much showed just this. And I really should have looked at those before doing this, but I can't watch the this week's new anime until I finish recording. Blah 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 blah. Anyways, it's really interesting, how much of Sherlock Hound's animation in general just actually works. Where you again feel like you're watching a show, a TV series, of course, and some of the animation just feels like something out of a Miyazaki Ghibli movie. And other times it feels familiar, like maybe it's the same thing, but it occurred to me that one possibility is there's an overlap in my mind behind animation in Lupin the Third, and especially because Miyazaki directed the Castle of Cagliostro, which is one of the Lupin the Third movies. And I think the other director, DVD Aficionado, at least has him doing some directing for Lupin the Third, the first 4 DVDs. I assume for all the DVDs, and his name is just not on there, unless it's supposed to indicate certain episodes, but I don't know. It's a bit confusing, but overall, just really interesting to watch it for that reason. Or at least that's the reason I found interesting to watch it, is it kind of feels like a bit of animation history to it. I don't know. Anyways, this has been probably pretty different anime analysis than what I usually do. Funny that.